You want to see something really cool and possibly even learn how to predict the future? I'm going to go ahead and go through some historical stuff. In order to predict the future, we often need to look back. And I don't have the time to go through this with a lot of my clients getting pre-approved by homes or refinancing existing homes, but this is really good information. I've shared it with hundreds of my clients in the past and just don't often have the time for it in other ways, in other times now. So here's a quick little video to help you enjoy the knowledge that's out there. You don't have to watch it if you don't want, but I think you'll like it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to go through and talk about some of the history that we have around us. So I'm going to start with home prices. So you can see right here, we're looking at a report. It's probably 20 years old or something like that. But what it is, it's going to show home prices from all over the United States from 2000 all the way back to 1940. So I'm just going to go down to Utah. And this is the price of a home in Utah, $24,100 in 1940. Now that's not 100% true. That's actually in the year $2,000. So they actually adjusted that number for inflation. And so what it actually was in 1940, the median price of a home in Utah was only $2,300. And part of the reason I share this is because a lot of people have a hard time. We've all got parents, grandparents, or whoever that's told us that they bought a house for whatever ridiculously low amount of money. I'm officially old enough at this point that I'm telling that story now. My first house was $170,000, and my parents freaked out when they saw what I was going to pay for that, and it was way too expensive. And of course, now everybody would love to pay $170,000 for a house in Utah, including me. But anyway, you can see how home prices went up, and you can see, I mean, pay less attention to this, the change, the $5,000 change, and more to the percentage of changes over a decade, more than doubled. Over another decade, almost doubled. From this one to this one, it was much smaller growth, and this is 1970. But then notice it's a huge jump in 1980, followed by another smaller one. But then again, it kept going. And what's kind of fun, if I can remember where I've got it here, is it this one? Yeah. So this is going up to the year 2000, right? So 146,000 was median price in Utah. But I was interested, what did it look like in 2010? And so in 2010, because of course that was right in the middle of the Great Recession, home prices have made it up to 220,000. So still a significant gain in that length of time. And then what about the Great Recession? Did we recover from that at all? And you go back to 2020, and the median price in Utah was 425,000. And so the value of this knowledge that we can have is that home prices continue to climb. They started off very, very small, and anybody that bought in 1940 looking at today's prices would not be able to fathom how it's even possible. But the reason it is possible is because our incomes also go up. And so home prices, if you're looking over decades, are always going to go up. They're always going to go up. We have rough periods and patches that we make it through, which sometimes they go down, but it's not too often, and it usually is a pretty significant experience going on. And just like the Great Recession, a lot of people were less concerned about home prices and more concerned about their jobs and other things like that. So let's see, what was the other thing I wanted to show you? Oh, and this is just a national average as well, and you can kind of see from somewhere in the 1970 up to the 2011, they calculated a 5% appreciation for this rate. This one, actually going back from 2020 all the way back to 1940, that is a 6.4% annual increase in house price average. And so pretty good rate of return, especially since that's an asset that you can purchase with only 3 or 5% down. So if you kind of think about the power of being able to purchase a $146,000 asset with only 5% of that, so what, $7,000? So $7,000 is then going to get 6% gain every year of 146. That's part of why real estate is such a great investment. All right, next thing that I wanted to show you is interest rates. So this one's a little hard to see, partly because my chart is so small, but I wanted to show you the whole thing before I zone it or hone it out. So I'm going to start. So this is today, and this is 1790. For those not quite aware of history, that's the beginning of our country. And in 2012 and 13, I used to like to tell people that they were getting better interest rates than George Washington could have got. So what kind of interest rates did George Washington have and others like him? So 1790 interest rates, the 10-year treasury, this is what we're looking at. So not 30-year fixed mortgages because they didn't exist yet. But the 10-year treasury was closer to 8% in the 7% range at that time. And you can see it's come all the way down at certain times down to 4%, which is about where we are right now. Under 4%, 1902, it was all the way down to 3%. I think that's 2 actually, close to 2%. And then of course it's hit there a couple times. And if you look at the history and when it was that low, generally there was something extremely serious going on. And that's kind of what you can learn from this chart, is that generally very serious things bring in lower interest rates. So bad news is good news for mortgages. And then you can see this interesting era. We've all heard about this when our parents were paying, 18, 19% interest rates on their house. You can see it's a blip. It's a very temporary blip. What led up to that is very interesting. It actually goes all the way back to around this era. You can see we were pretty stable here for several years. Well, this is where the World War II ends. This is where it in World War II, if you get more into it, didn't exactly end completely. There was something that came on its heels, which led to the Korean War, and then escalated from there into the Vietnam War and the Cold War. And this is the result of the Cold War. Because of the Cold War, we had a lot less international trade. And because it was less international trade, there was less competition. And so when there's no competition, producers, manufacturers can put out garbage and charge a lot of money for it because they don't have any competition. And unfortunately, that's what we were seeing is something called stagflation. So without things getting better, they were actually getting more and more expensive. There was inflation without improvement. Inflation is one thing. Stagflation is where I guess it was just the economy itself was actually stagnant, even coming backwards, which usually you don't see a receding economy with inflation. So it was a very interesting era. What fixed that era is very interesting in the time that I'm recording this video, which is 2024. This is we had a lot of inflation, a lot of problems, and it was the Federal Reserve and Paul Volcker got together with Ronald Reagan and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to jack interest rates up 6% in a 10-month period. In 2022, interest rates were jacked up 5.25% in an 18-month period, so very similar. And they effectively capped interest rates. They kind of gave a heart attack to the entire economy, which effectively was able to bring interest rates. It created deflation in the national economy, among other things. And so basically you can see that interest rates started coming back down because inflation came all the way back down, and it really came and continued all the way down into 2007. Now I didn't grab more current interest rates just because I feel like we're all fairly familiar with those already. But from 2007, they went all the way down to the lowest you can see anywhere on this chart, actually, well, almost to right around these same eras. But then they went even lower in 2020, 2021 for other reasons. I think I'll share those reasons though. For those that, I guess for this one I don't really have a graphic, so I'll just go ahead and. So what happened in the pandemic that brought interest rates so crazy low is the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve came in on this chart that we were just looking at together in December of 2008. They announced that they were going to roll out QE1, a quantitative easing one, which is they were going to roll out $600 billion in purchases of treasuries and mortgage bonds. When they did that, interest rates immediately fell through the floor. Prices for those things went up, and the rates went down for them. And that's what brought interest rates down in 2009 and 10, and kind of kept the whole mortgage market in a great place. But what happened was, over the next 5 to 10 years, is they rolled out quantitative easing 2. So they first changed QE1 to trillion. And then after that was done, then they rolled out QE2, quantitative easing 2, and they did a second trillion. And so what that means when the Federal Reserve rolls that out is that they're literally printing money, and with this printed valueless money, they're showing up to the marketplace with the American dollar, and they're purchasing bonds from treasuries and from mortgages. And so they were purchasing those items, and those were going on their balance sheet. And so quantitative easing 3 rolled out, and that was, they called it QE infinity, because they didn't put a limit on it, and that one ended up taking them up to a balance sheet over $4 trillion. So by 2017, the Federal Reserve had injected and printed over $4 trillion into the U.S. economy, which was fantastic, actually. It was very, very useful for buoying our economy, because it was in really, really bad shape in 2007, 8, and 9, and 10. But it was very, very good. In 2018, they started letting some of that 4.5 trillion roll off their balance sheet, in that when people would refinance or when the treasuries would mature, they would just destroy the money. The Federal Reserve would get the money back as they matured, and then just destroy it instead of re-injecting it into the economy. So that's kind of what was going on in 2018. 2018, the rates were starting to climb a little bit. Well, late 2019, the Feds decided that the Federal Reserve started injecting money again. And I'm not quite sure as to why they did that. It looked to me like a political ploy. But by 2020, in March, as you know, that's when the pandemic was announced to begin, and all kinds of havoc occurred. And then they started injecting money again, but way more than they had ever done. And in by 2022, they had injected another $4.5 trillion. So their balance sheet was nearly $9 trillion in 2022. So that massive demand, they showed up to the marketplace that sells mortgages and other bonds. They showed up to that marketplace with the desire to purchase $200 or $300 billion every month of treasuries and mortgages. And so that was such a huge demand for those items that the price of those items skyrocketed, which is what sends the interest rates on them way, way low. And so on that chart that we were looking at, I'll pull it back up, the 10-year treasury, which is what this chart is, the 10-year treasury was literally right around zero. And so I'll go back to the full view so you can see it again. So zero would be this blue line on the bottom, right, with all the hashtags on it, or tick marks or whatever. So that's what the Federal Reserve did in 2020, 2021. They brought interest rates so low that was the result. And so it was a very interesting move, probably unnecessary, and it definitely is what stoked all the inflation that we ended up with later in 2023 when inflation was registered by the CPI at, what was it, 9.9%. Gratefully, they were able to get on top of that quite a bit. We're still over their marks right now at the recording of this. They're still over that 2% threshold that they've set in the sand, but luckily they're mostly on top of it. So there you go. Let's go ahead and continue. Just a couple more things real quick. So this, what we're looking at now, so I wanted to talk about home prices again. So we kind of talked about interest rates, and then before that we were talking about home prices. I want to kind of show you what drives home prices upwards, and it had everything to do with the population, but the population as compared to housing. Like how much demand there is. And so this right here, what you're looking at, this is the 1.4 million households or housing units are completed each year. This is back in the 90s. So this is about where we are today, interestingly enough, if you can see that. We're about 1.5, maybe a little bit less than that each year that they're building. And you can see it kind of drops under that. What's interesting is you can see how it gets really, really high up here. But if you know more about the population, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers. So what was going on here is there was increasing supply, lots and lots and lots of homes were being built. But what people weren't paying attention to here, and because of the credit boom was the invention of extra credit that people could borrow. And so coming into the year 2000 and beyond, banks had started rolling out increasing amounts of abilities to get loans. It was really, really easy to get credit cards that you could borrow literally $20,000 on a credit card, and your monthly payment would be like $120. You would never pay it off. Literally, it would never pay off, and you would have deferred interest even in that regard. But that legislation eventually passed to eliminate that option. So now if you owe $20,000 on a credit card, you have a big payment. But that was pretty common at that moment, which enabled a lot of the Americans to extend themselves pretty far with credit and go into a lot of debt, which was important to the banking industry because in this length of time, the Gen X population was actually taking center stage. Baby boomers were already starting to kind of fade out. Baby boomers were the biggest generation we've ever seen, which is why we were building so many homes. They were huge, the most babies ever that we know had record of at that moment. But Gen X was 12 million people smaller as a generation, and so we couldn't consume what they consumed, we couldn't live in the number of homes they lived in, we just couldn't occupy the space they lived in, we just didn't need it. And so without this credit boom, Gen Xers would have never been able to keep the economy and housing growing, but you can see that they did continue to build more and more houses until suddenly it became very clear in 6 and 7 and 8 that there just wasn't anybody to occupy those homes. And so then you see construction just fell through the floor and went all the way down to under 500,000 units a year that were being built. And you can see, so by 2011, we were starting to recover as an economy, and millennials were starting to take center stage by then. And millennials waited for a minute because of all this. They weren't sure that they wanted to be first-time home buyers and stuff. But by 2012, 2015, there was a lot of millennials showing up, but you can see there just weren't any homes being built. In the last couple of years, it's been almost 2 million households per year that have been formed. And by households formed, I don't mean people born. I mean households being formed, marriages, divorces, creating 2 households, marriages, pulling people out of their parents' house into 1 new household. So about 2 million households a year. When you look at that over the last few years, and you see that we have almost never built 2 million homes, and especially in the last 15 years, we have never built 2 million homes in a single year. How are we supposed to house 2 million new households a year? And so that is the number one reason why there's been this imbalance between housing and why house prices have continued to climb, and why we have the depressed inventory and stuff. So again, this is the exact same thing. So annual completions from the year 02 to the year 16. You'll see it doesn't quite line up dollar or number for number, but it's close. It's a little under 2 million in this chart here, where this chart is low. But you'll see the household formation, right? That's the blue one. So there's one. So this is like almost a perfect year, right? Households built matches the households formed. But you'll notice this one, there's 500,000 homes almost built that weren't occupied. In this one, there's 1 million homes that are built that aren't occupied. So this is the Gen X. There's just not any Gen Xers out there to occupy them. They're just a small generation. And so this is overbuilt in a major way. And this took years for all this to make it off of the market. But you can see it even took a few years before the household growth really went that much. And by now, the builders were watching very, very carefully. They wanted the population to outgrow the construction. And that's exactly what they were doing. That's what they've been doing ever since. The builders are now up around 1.5 million a year that are being built. But we've been up over 1.5 million households going to be every year for quite a while. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So hopefully that you find that insightful information. And if you really watch the whole thing, then cool, good for you. And feel free to talk to me about it. I am pretty geeky about this stuff. I find it very fascinating. But yeah, there we go. So thanks for your attention, and hopefully you can see where that can help you with expectations of interest rates and home pricing and everything like that. Have a great day.